Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is the City of Aspen City Council regular meeting for June 14, 2022. That will be a call to order. Could we have a roll call for attendance, please?
Councilor Doyle.
Here.
Councilor Hounstein.
Present.
Councilor Mazzaro. Councilor Richards. Here. Mayor Tory.
And here. This evening, we have a scheduled public appearance. And we'll start off with that. I want to thank you guys for joining us tonight. This is our opportunity to award the 2022 Historic Preservation Commission Award. This is a one-time-a-year event. We get to celebrate excellence in preservation here in the Aspen community. Historic preservation has been part of Aspen since Walter Pepke and Herbert Beyer first came to town in 1945 when they saved the Victorian mining town and made it the Aspen that we all know and love today. Please join me and the Historic Preservation Commission in thanking those who went above and beyond to save our cultural heritage and enhance our community. I'm going to hand it over to Cara Thompson, who's here as the Historic Preservation Commission Chair to deliver the awards that you see in front of me. And then we also have some refreshments in the back. We invite all of you to enjoy those as well in celebration. And before we move further, I do want to just go off script here a little bit and recognize some of our staff members who make this program, help the Preservation Commission, and really have forwarded historic preservation in our community. Amy Simon, of course, has been our Chief Historic Officer for a long time, has now moved to another part of the department in community development, but we always are indebted to Amy for her work. Natalie Feinberg-Lopez is here with us tonight, and she is currently a lead planner for the Historic Preservation and works also with the Historic Preservation Commission. And also Sarah Yoon, who's been with us for a couple years and also does a great job for us in our Community Development Department. So thank you to our staff members. How about a little round of applause for them? But now, Cara, I think you're up.
Okay. Do you want me to stand up there and present, or sit down here so I can be recorded?
You've got the awards. If you're gonna hand these out,
Yeah.
maybe come up here.
Okay.
And I'll just
And I'll do my
something
best.
like this, and if you stand
Right between them and
Okay.
speak directly into one of them.
How about this? Okay. All
There
right.
you go.
All right. Hi, everybody. Tonight we're awarding the Marble Gardens. It is one of Beyer's first environmental sculptures, which predated the earthwork sculpture that I think everybody here is familiar with, and the environmental sculpture movement by at least 10 years. One of the special things about this project is that when it was originally installed, Beyer went to the town of Marble and hand chose specific pieces to be installed in this installation. The conservation team that worked on upgrading this sculpture was led by Design Workshop. They removed all of the sculpture from the base, cleaned all of the biological growth, soils, and stains, while it was carefully reconstructed and restructured to repair cracking, leaks, and other environmental impacts that have happened over the years. So they took painstaking care in replacing each of these marble elements into the exact location that Beyer had originally placed them, and made upgrades that were invisible to what we see when we walk by it. So the final execution of this, this is our only award this year, and we talked about it quite a bit because this team did such an excellent job in the restoration of this structure. So we're really proud to award them this Historic Preservation Excellence Award. So without further ado, I'd love to hand out these awards to the team. So from Design Workshop, we have Richard Shaw and Margaret Plum. Aspen Institute, we have Lisa Bollinger and Crystal Logan. And then we have the contractor here as well, Greg Woods from GF Woods. Congratulations, you guys did an excellent job.
Wait one moment. We wouldn't mind a couple words from any of you on your perspective on this project would be wonderful.
Thank you, Mayor. We couldn't be prouder to have been involved in a project that was so community-based, so dedicated by everyone who worked on the project. And it's a puzzling thing because it appears when you see the sculpture today that there's nothing big deal about how you would renovate it. You know, it's concrete, water, and marble, but it is complicated, particularly because in order to preserve this for the long time that we hope it's here for generations, you have to start at the foundation and solve from the foundation up. And we had excellent construction, excellent curation, excellent management. And again, we're just pleased that this will be here as part of Aspen's landscape for a long time.
Thank you.
Invite people to have snacks in the back.
One more reminder for you. There are refreshments in the back. Something for everybody back there. That brings us to citizens' comments and petitions, and I'll start with in-room. If there's any members of the public that wish to address council tonight on items that are not listed for public hearing on our agenda, please come on up. And then I'll look on Zoom and the same invitation. If you are joining us via Zoom, we are still doing our hybrid meeting format. So if you want to address council on any items, please unmute yourself and introduce yourself for the record.
Bill Guth,
Hi, Bill. Go right ahead.
how are you?
Good. Thank you.
Well, I'm obviously speaking about the residential development ordinances that are on the table tonight. I don't think that's scheduled for public comment tonight, but I would like you all to be aware of, and make sure that you are aware of all of the items that staff has put into those new ordinances that don't seem to have anything to do with the original reason for the moratorium and don't seem to have anything to do with the reasons you all stated for the moratorium and the changes that we needed to make in our community. It seems like this has been an open invitation for staff to craft all sorts of legislation and throw all sorts of things into the bucket that many of you may not understand. For example, there's all kinds of new limitations on fenestration, which means windows and doors in buildings, things that may only occupy one line buried deep into the ordinance, but have major impacts and cost a lot of money and take a lot of refiguring, particularly for people who have had projects that were designed under the current code that now suddenly have to redesign those. So I implore you to take your time and understand that and realize that this isn't exactly what you asked for. There's a lot more to it than that. And then in general, I ask that you reflect on some of the recent actions that you've taken, like the child care situation at the Yellow Brick. And although it's well-intentioned, and I understand that it's well-intentioned, many of us do, it has created a lot of unwanted side effects. And I guarantee you, I promise you, that this ordinance will create a lot of unintended consequences and side effects that you are not thinking about and will come back to bite you. And I don't think it's well fleshed out. I don't think that, as you well know, I don't think that the whole thing was well considered in terms of the impacts on the community. But I guarantee you there will be unintended consequences here. And based on the recent kind of issues that have come up in our community, I hope that you can all reflect on that and maybe take some time to consult with some people who work on the other side of the table from staff and council and understand how those effects might come back to bite you. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Bill, if you have any other items that you see in the proposed ordinance that you want to bring to our attention, please send us an email with any other input that you have. We appreciate it.
Will do.
Thank you. Looking on Zoom again for members of the public that wish to make comment this evening. And a last call for public comment, either in room or on Zoom meeting. All right, seeing none, I'll bring it back to the council table, and we'll move on to council members and mayor's comments, and we're going to start with Ward.
Thank you. My comments are my own. They're not associated with the city. They do not represent a position the city has. I make these comments from my heart and for my love for Aspen. There are times that demand us to stand up and become involved. I felt the Russian invasion of Ukraine demanded me to do something. I did. I felt to do nothing was not acceptable. Now, a free and independent press is in jeopardy. I feel the need to defend an Aspen institution and values held dearly. Theodore Roosevelt's quote, known as "the man in the arena," has given me courage. I'm going to take the time to read this for us all. Quote, "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs and comes short again and again, because there's no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms and great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither knew victory nor defeat." End of his quote. Honor, integrity, transparency, and compassion are values in Aspen. When people and businesses do not live by these values, the fabric of our community is compromised. There are truths and facts. There's no such thing as alternate facts. We're living in a time of false narratives propagated through lies and distortions. Russia invaded Ukraine. Trump lost the election. Our country was founded on principles. We hold these truths to be self-evident. When false narratives are demanded by owners of a newspaper, or truth is suppressed and reporting of truths and facts is prohibited, the fabric of our community is compromised. Hypothetically, a man is offered a promotion, and he reportedly conditions his acceptance to that position on the ability to exercise honor, integrity, and transparency. He's showing character. If that condition is allegedly promised and he accepts the position, he has the right and expectation to be afforded the freedom he was promised. Hypothetically, he has a family whom he has taken an oath to provide for. The well-being of his family is dependent on his employer to honor their reported conditions of employment. In the case in point, if he publishes the truth with transparency and he hypothetically was fired, this is against all that I hold honorable and acceptable. Where is the integrity and compassion from the owners of a newspaper that renege on their word? Speaking truth to power requires courage and strength. The fired party exhibited the courage that Teddy Roosevelt spoke of. What has happened to Aspen? Out-of-town investors hide behind LLCs. We came here because we love the natural beauty and the lively character of the people that live here. They come here to invest and maximize their funds. They come here and import the values and behaviors that they move to get away from. They inflate property values and have not the courage to show their face and embrace Aspen. Aspen is fortunate to have a team of dedicated journalists and columnists. They dare to speak the truth, even when it hurts. They have families to support, rent to make, and mortgages to pay. Now an out-of-state family is forcing them to toe the line, to toe their line, to speak the truth as they define it, to live with the realization that they may lose their job by a betrayal of the word of the owner. An investor from out of state purchased land. They bullied the newspaper for publishing news about the purchase by suing the newspaper. Now it appears as though we have an out of state business that controls the Aspen press. What has happened to Aspen? If something is wrong, you all must do something to stop it. The owner of one of our newspapers may be a bad fit for Aspen. We value truth and freedom. These values are being stolen from us. They were sold to the highest investor. We're blessed to have many people living in Aspen with great means. I'm appealing to them now. Help save Aspen by funding the purchase of freedom and truth by buying the Times or funding a new paper where truth, integrity, and honor have a home. Fund, don't invest. Give without the need for profit. Give to save Aspen. What has happened to Aspen?
Thanks, Ward. Other comments?
I can't follow that. Thank you,
Understand.
Ward, for your comments and your heartfelt emotions there. The only thing I was going to say is that we have Colorado Municipal League meetings over in Breckenridge for their annual conference next week, and so we will not be having a Tuesday night work session, and we will be gone during the week to talk with our colleagues, find out what laws were passed, and find out what innovation others are taking in the realms that we're all working on, whether it's climate change or affordable housing or transportation or childcare or employee shortages. So that was the only real news I had today, other than, I guess, two things. I'd like to point out that we have a new four-way stop sign at the corner of the Aspen Square building and City Market, and wonderful safety bulb-out crossings. But for those of us who have rote habits at times, I've seen a few people kind of coming pretty far through that intersection before they squeal on the brakes and realize they almost hit somebody. So please be aware of that change in traffic. There are flags on the stop signs to remind you, and it was a very dangerous intersection. So there is that, and I'd like to hope that our community has a very safe food and wine weekend. Thank you.
Thanks.
Just a couple little snippets of environmental news from around the West. We used to have our peak runoff in June. It is now in May. This year we had 11 dust events here in the Roaring Fork Valley, which helped hasten our snowpack leaving the mountains sooner. And the drought continues across the West. And the madness continues. I was just reading today that there is still an effort to get a pipeline from Flaming Gorge Reservoir to the Front Range across 350 miles of southern Wyoming on a system that's already taxed beyond belief. I just don't think we're acting on these environmental causes quickly enough.
Thanks, John. Comments from me this evening. The first thing that I'd like to mention is the community tragedy that we had recently over in Old Snow, Mass. A member of our community, Clint Court, had his home burned down, and there was some loss of life as well. Clint himself has been taken to a hospital in Denver, where they are expecting a recovery, but a long road. There is a GoFundMe page that has been set up. Again, that is Clint. His last name is Coerdt, Court. Again, this is a community tragedy. If any of you knew Clint, just one of the nicest guys, willing to help out with anybody at any time. He was the kind of guy that asked if he could help you move or help you fix something and get stuff done. Just a great guy. He and his fiance could use any help that anybody cares to offer. So again, there's a GoFundMe page. Take your time and go look at it if you can. The next thing I'd like to mention is mental health. I just want to keep this in the forefront of our discussions as we all go forward into this summer. Not a day goes by that I don't talk to somebody that expresses some of the anxiety that they have and some of their concerns. We all know that times are tough. Times are tough in a lot of different ways. If you need, or if you know anybody that does need some help or somebody to talk to, there are many avenues. We are really well resourced here in our valley. I always like to mention the Hope Center at 925-5858 is a great resource to call the Hope Center. They have somebody online 24 hours a day and always willing to help talk with you or point you in the right direction. Another great resource is aspenstrong.org online. They have a listing of many of the different resources available in our community, and truly there are what you might call grants, benefits, scholarships, if you will, so that these resources are available to anybody at low or no cost, depending on your needs. So please, if you or anybody you know could use somebody to talk to or needs any help, reach out. And lastly, I just wanted to say that yes, not just a four-way stop over there at the Aspen Square building, but we've got a lot of road work going on out there. We want everybody to be safe and slow. Be careful, you know, even just on Main Street where we've got some work going in for improved bus and transit projects. Slow down through that construction zone. It's amazing how people see a little chicane in the road and they think that's an invitation to test out how their car handles. But please slow down. In addition to that, as we're moving into summer, we are going to have a trial run on Galena for going to parallel parking and making the streets a little bit more pedestrian accessible, bike accessible, and safer for all. Again, this is a trial. We want to try this out. This is a direction that we all talk about, having town be more pedestrian, safe, and focused. So again, be prepared for this. And a little bit of what I'm saying is, you know, maybe now is a time to look at your own habits. When are you in traffic? When are you driving? I recognize fully that there are needs for people to be driving, kids, groceries, errands, bikes, stand-up paddle boards, whatever it may be. There's times that you're going to use your car. We just ask that you do it appropriately, safely, and if you can alter some of your habits, you might want to get an e-bike and meet up with Ward out there on the streets as well. So anyway, thank you very much. Those are my comments this evening. Thank you, Council, for indulging me.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Not seeing any agenda amendments this evening. That'll bring us down to City Manager's comments, and we have Diane Foster here with us.
Nothing for me, thank you.
Thank you. And board reports. If there are any board reports, we do share these at a work session on a monthly basis, but this is an opportunity for council members to share any brief board report updates.
I was in Grand Junction last week on Thursday and Friday for the Club 20 retreat, and the board essentially striking out on some new direction. So I think we've all been through retreats, so know they're a little bit of a brain drain, and you wait a few days to see what the facilitator comes out of with those energies. But they're really trying to find a way to move to a broader engagement with the entire Western Slope community and perhaps move out of a role or a perception that they feel they've been pigeonholed in the past, and maybe for good reason. But I think that when you look at a 60-year-old organization that has membership from all 20 counties of the Western Slope and are very much aligned with us on many interests, such as keeping water on the West Slope, it's a valuable use of time. So that's kind of been the only real new board report I have at this time. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll save, I'm the alternate for the RAFTA board, but we did have a 8:30 till 2:30 retreat on Thursday, a strategic plan. Covered a lot of material. I'll let Tori handle most of that because he is the voting member from representing the city of Aspen. I rushed back up here, had about a half hour before I had a core meeting and our subcommittee meeting on governance, recruiting some community members, and then I went right from there to Aspen Sister Cities, where we had another hour and a half. So Thursday was a marathon day for me. I was ready for at least a glass of wine. And I see, Mike Tunte and Austin Weiss are here if they'd like to say anything about their trip to Bariloche. They did an exchange with through Sister Cities, reported back. Aspen is helping Bariloche plan a park, and these gentlemen went and helped plan that park. So I invite you to share it with us.
Yeah, and let me preface this just real quickly. For those that aren't that familiar, the Aspen Sister Cities Sister Cities International is an organization that pairs up like communities in order to do cultural exchanges. I think the actual mission is stated as fostering understanding and global peace through some of these exchanges. Oftentimes, council members may visit some of our other sister cities, Bariloche, Chamonix, Shimakapu, Japan, Garmisch-Partenkirchen, Queenstown, New Zealand, and Davos, Switzerland. 7 for the city of Aspen. These exchanges, we send ski patrollers to some of these communities. We send students, and students come and visit our community as well. It's an amazing program that really does foster a lot of understanding and international goodwill. But this was really a unique and wonderful exchange because they got to tap into a little bit of our expertise with staff members. So I just wanted to say that we were talking earlier, and I just am so impressed. I thought this was a wonderful exchange. So if you want to just tell a little bit about what you were doing, that'd be great.
Yeah, briefly, thank you. And it really was an amazing experience. We actually started our conversations with both Bariloche and the Sister Cities program about 2.5 years ago, maybe a little more, and initially had made plans to visit Bariloche in the spring of 2020, and unfortunately COVID stopped that program short there. Diego Canastrace from Bariloche reached out to Mike and I early winter this year and kind of reignited this conversation about doing a visit down there. We initially met Diego again about 2.5 years ago when he was visiting Aspen, and we sat down and it ultimately did a tour of a number of our parks and open spaces here, and we were able to share a lot of stories of ways that we've gone about acquiring open space, how some of our parks projects had come to fruition, and then he was sharing with us a project they were working on down there in Bariloche. It was roughly a 7,000-acre piece of federally owned land that is heavily used recreationally by the community, and they're in the process of trying to formalize it into a protected park space. And it was a fascinating 7 days that we spent down there working with Diego and his team, the Sister Cities program led by Lala and Griff were amazing, and we had great hosts while we were there, taking very good care. Spent a lot of time walking around in the park, meeting with stakeholders. We met with a number of we had a community meeting with council members and the public and stakeholders talking about what had worked for us here in Aspen on these kinds of projects, and just an amazing opportunity for us to share ideas. And I have to say that I think Mike and I walked away learning as much about how they're doing things down there as we were able to share with them of how we do it. So it was really a neat opportunity to really exchange ideas. So definitely a chance for us to come back rejuvenated and interested in implementing some things here as well. So from that we saw.
Did you say it's a federal park?
No, it's federally owned land.
Federally owned
Yeah,
land.
so a lot of stakeholders trying to figure out how to coordinate this into a community park. That's what they were calling the Parque Central.
It's federally owned, but it's within the municipality of Bariloche, which their municipal structure is, their city limits is enormous. It extends, it's like, almost think of it as the Roaring Fork Valley, as a more of a relationship-wise than just the Aspen city limits.
Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Hope you had a good time and also enjoyed your work down there.
We did indeed.
Right on.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Board reports. I will talk briefly about what was 6 hours at RAFTA in Carbondale. It was a chance for a retreat, so we focused on our outcome areas of safe customers, workforce, and the public, accessibility and mobility, sustainable workforce, financial sustainability, satisfied customers, environmental sustainability, and high-performing organization are the 7 tenets for outcome areas that RAFTA bases its annual plans, work plans off of, and strategic planning. We broke out into multiple groups throughout the day, focusing on the environment. Obviously, housing is an issue, and accessibility and mobility, and how we're going to move RAFTA into the new age of first and last mile solutions, as well as just trying to make RAFTA more effective, get more ridership for so many reasons. One of the comments that I had during the meeting was, it's amazing what RAFTA has become. Originally, it was moving bodies, it was moving people, but now their mission has become an environmental mission, if you will. Again, they're taking on housing because of that workforce that's needed. Indeed, the workforce is impacting us all when it comes to transit and RAFTA. The schedules have been changed. The routes have been married in some cases, all because of worker shortages. We have the buses, we don't have people to drive them. We all know that the housing crisis is real, and it is here, and it's impacting us from here to Rifle and beyond. It was a good day of a meeting. We actually had 1 hour of a regular RAFTA meeting in which we just took care of a couple of odds and ends. But again, that was really the biggest update that we got, was about bus driver shortages and schedule changes. And then we got into a 5-hour retreat. A 5-hour retreat with a working lunch and no breaks. We also enjoyed a great presentation at lunch. I thought that was a wonderful gentleman. I don't have his name.
I can't remember his last name.
Yeah, came in and spoke to us about the future of EVs, from light duty to heavy duty, and indeed buses as well, and the nature of technology, where we are, where we're seeing it go, and gave us a little bit of update, because there's a tremendous amount of desire to see our buses being run up and down the valley electric. Current electric buses in the RAFTA fleet are used on specific routes only because of charging station challenges. The good news there is that one of those charging stations is going to be installed at Ruby Park, so we will see more accessibility to the electric buses that are in the fleet, because we will have the opportunity to charge them up here. That's about it. A lot of work for 5 hours it was. That's all for me for board reports. Any others?
No board reports.
Can you just say a brief statement about your meeting with the USS Colorado,
Oh, yes.
hosting them here at council chambers?
Absolutely. Me and my illustrious Assistant City Manager met Jim DeFrancia and the crew of the USS Colorado, which is a Virginia-class submarine, approximately 350-some feet long. Yep, 3 stories tall and 45 feet wide, crewed by 135. Pretty fascinating. So whenever the USS Colorado pulls into a foreign port, they not only run the U.S. flag up the flagpole, but the state of Colorado's flag goes up too, and that's the way for every state. I mentioned to the sailors that they were probably fortunate they weren't stationed on the USS Delaware. We also learned that the mess, the cabin's eating room is decorated with John Fielder nature photos from around the state, and a lot of the sailors were wondering if they were actual real places. On their way here, they drove over Independence Pass and realized that, yes, all those photos are real. And their hallways are decorated with Colorado sports memorabilia as well. It was really fascinating meeting these guys and learning more about their lives on this boat, 7 months underwater at a time. Anyway,
Claustrophobia.
Well, thank you for hosting them.
you're welcome. It was my pleasure. And thanks, Diane.
That'll bring us down to our consent calendar this evening. The consent calendar is Resolution 70, contract with Push Pedal Pull for new cardio equipment. Resolution 71, contract with Elam for Cozy Point Ranch grading and drainage project. Resolution number 72, approving a management agreement between Aspen-Pinckney County Housing Authority, APCHA, and the City of Aspen to manage Truscott Phase 2. Resolution 76, time code DST6 street sweeper replacement. And the draft minutes of May 17th. Do any council members wish to pull any items for discussion this evening?
No.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? I had one item here, and I'm looking at Austin. Austin, I know this is different, the grading contract for the drainage project out there at Cozy Point, but I just wanted to use this as an opportunity to say I think it would be wonderful if we had some signage out there. There's a small Cozy Point open space sign, but boy, what a great partnership with the county and the city. We have both an equestrian center out there as well as the agricultural center and the farm collaborative. So I know it's difficult. I know sign codes in the county can be challenging, but I just thought, I think it'd be wonderful if we let people know what was going on out there, and truly a sign would say something to the effect of that partnership that we have with the county. And I just wanted to put that on your plate.
Yeah, thank you. And just a clarifying question, a sign for passersby on the highway or, okay,
Yeah.
we'll have to look into that. We can do some research and see what can be done there.
I appreciate it. It's just a suggestion. I just think it's some great work is going on out there, and it's a great partnership, and I think it'd be wonderful if people knew what was happening.
Yeah, and one of the things that we have talked about and was referenced in the Cozy Point Ranch Management Plan is also doing some sort of interpretive signage on the property itself for visitors, telling the story of the ranch.
That'd be great. And I just said about the equestrian and the agriculture, but I guess there's a few other uses out there, maybe another use out there, the archery range.
Archery
right?
range, yeah, and
So,
yeah, we can,
You just have to follow the county sign code and see what you can do in placement, but I think it's a good idea.
thank you.
we'll look into it.
Thanks.
You bet.
Thanks.
We have a motion and a second. No further discussion. Could we have a roll call vote for the consent calendar, please?
Counselor Doyle?
Yes.
Counselor Howenstein?
Yes.
Counselor Richards?
Yes.
Mayor Tory?
Yes. That'll bring us to first reading of ordinances. First one is ordinance number 13. This is residential building and response to moratorium. And again, this is first reading.
Just give me a second to set up and I'll be right with you.
No problem. And while you are setting up, just a question for you. This is first reading. Oftentimes in first reading, there will be just a brief introduction and then an opportunity for council, bless you, to ask questions or make requests for second reading. Are we going to do a little bit deeper discussion on this item?
That's the intention.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, is it okay if I share my screen?
Please do.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For the record, Ben Anderson, planner with Community Development. Sitting next to me is Garrett Larimer, planner with Community Development. On the call on Zoom this evening, Philip Sapino, Community Development Director, is with us. And our consultant leaders, Jessica Guerra and Eric Krongold with Design Workshop, are with us as well. So if you have any questions for them, they're here and available. This is first reading tonight of two ordinances. They're related. They need to be considered by council separately. But in your packet, I kind of talked about them together, and in the materials, there was definitely some connection of the two topics, but there are independent ordinances. And as you're talking about them this evening, and whatever action you take this evening on them, they need to be considered separately. The first of these ordinances, Ordinance 13. This is the big ordinance that's the response to the moratorium direction. It involves multiple sections of the land use code. This is going to be the primary focus of the conversation this evening is to do a bit of a recap from the work session on May the 23rd, the last time we kind of talked about this set of issues. And then at that time, during that work session, there was a few issues that were still kind of up in the air. Council asked for some additional information on a couple of topics. And there's one topic that I would like to get some direction from you this evening on, so we'll focus on those items. But I think for the public's benefit, do want to just run through the contents of the ordinance briefly and talk about the major policy initiatives and the changes that are being proposed. The second ordinance, number 14, is much more narrow in scope, relates specifically to the Fee-in-Lieu related to affordable housing mitigation that's codified in the land use code. We did an update to this back in a year ago, and at the time we said that we're going to update this annually in January and then do a 5-year update. We postponed that January update with the moratorium being in place, and we're bringing that back for council consideration at this time as part of the package around the moratorium. So the request of council tonight, do a final review and discuss the two ordinances, provide input on the employee generation rate. This is the one topic that we'll certainly take direction on any of the ordinance contents this evening, but we do have this one particular topic that we'd like some direction on. And we do recommend at the end of our discussion that you read and approve ordinances on first reading. You've seen this slide from the ComDev team multiple occasions. We're getting towards the end of our timeline. Back at the end of May, you had first reading on the short-term rental discussion. Tonight, we're engaged on first reading on the residential building ordinance number 13 and the Fee-in-Lieu ordinance number 14. And then the plan is to come back to you 2 weeks from tonight on the 28th of June and look at 3 ordinances at second reading. Ordinance 9 on short-term rentals, and then the 2 ordinances that we're talking about this evening. Recent work process, since the last time we talked to you about these issues, we've continued to work with our consultant team, primarily in code drafting and refinement, particularly in the growth management section. That section of code, you start to pull on threads, and it has intersections with other parts of the land use code. And so the ordinance is a big ordinance with lots of changes to lots of sections of the land use code. That has taken some coordination both internally within the city and with our consultant team. And we're also, tomorrow evening, we have kind of sent out an invitation to 70 folks who have participated with us kind of in focus groups and technical stakeholder discussions. We've sent them out the materials for the packet this evening and have given kind of one last sort of opportunity for them to sort of make comment to staff. Certainly they're welcome to make comment at second reading, but we wanted to give one more opportunity. That's going to happen tomorrow evening after we have the conversation this evening. Next steps, moving forward, tonight's discussion, any direction from council on these topics will certainly be incorporated into the discussion at second reading. We're continuing to make sure that these code amendments are aligned and that we have things consistent across the different sections of the land use code. At second reading, you will be seeing some minor changes to the draft language that you've seen this evening. Doesn't change the substance of things, but are some formatting changes and some moving around of some items just to make sure that we're not making any unintended changes to the land use code. Also for council's consideration, just as we're coming to the last weeks of the moratorium, moratorium comes to an end on August 8th. The ordinance did need 30 days to come into effect, which is why we've scheduled the second reading for the 28th. As you're thinking about the issues tonight and as we get towards second reading, there would be an opportunity for one special meeting after the 28th if there are any outstanding issues that the council needs to further deliberate, if more discussion is necessary at second reading. So I just wanted to kind of give some framing to where we are and some of the space that we have between now and the close of the moratorium. Since we last talked on the 23rd, staff has gone to the Planning and Zoning Commission and talked for more than 2 hours with the P&Z Commission on the nature of the ordinance, the policy changes that are being proposed. It was a great conversation. They had good questions. I will say that Planning and Zoning Commission, we've got several new members who are coming into the commission, and this was maybe not the best set of topics to give an introduction to the land use code on. Again, they certainly followed along with the discussion, but I think there was some reluctance by the body as a whole to give a formal recommendation on the ordinances generally or on even specific sort of topics. Certainly, we can talk about more of these issues if you have questions about them, and I didn't include any discussion of P&Z in your packet just because of the intersection of packet deadlines. But I think their comments and their questions, I think, are comments that we've heard generally in the community around the mitigation topic, particularly around the demolition process and number of demolition allotments that there would be in a given year. I think we had some members of the commission who wanted to make sure that we weren't underestimating the employee generation that's associated with the operations and maintenance of projects. So again, comments that probably aren't surprising to you, but I think it was, they were outcomes of a good conversation with P&Z, but just to be clear, we did not receive a formal recommendation during that meeting. So I'm going to try to go through the big policy discussion as quickly as we can. On any of these topics, please feel free to interrupt as I'm going through them with questions or comments or things you'd like to discuss further. But this first half of the presentation this evening, I would like to try to get through as briefly as possible. And it's, again, not new information to you. It's just, again, I think mostly for the public's use of, giving, again, a summary of the big policy changes that are coming out of Ordinance 13. These four areas, demolition and redevelopment, primarily that's dealt with in amendments to the growth management quota system, and a new section of the code on demolition. We are having a proposal about recalculating or providing a new calculation for affordable housing mitigation for residential development. That required us to go into, again, growth management and calculations and measurements section. We are proposing to take 100% affordable housing projects that are compliant with the land use code, transition those to an administrative review rather than a board review. And then lastly, going into the zone district section, 26.710, and trying to find some additional opportunities around affordable housing within the zone districts. Again, we can go through, and again, I'm happy to talk about any of these topics in more detail, but very quickly on demolition. I would say, from staff's view, on the kind of residential building side, on the built environment side, this is the biggest departure of anything that we're doing. We're using the growth management allotment system to try to give some limits to the pace and scale of development. Demolition and redevelopment projects, in staff's view, and based on folks that we've talked to in the community, are very impactful projects in a variety of ways, and we chose to focus on these types of projects for a reason. In our discussion at the work session, staff gave a range of possibilities to City Council in terms of landing on the number of these types of projects you would like to see in a given year. Over the last 10 years or so, we've seen an average of 6.5, and council gave direction that you would like that number to be 6. And so that's what's in the ordinance, kind of as the proposed number of annual allotments for this type of development activity. And then the other side of this equation is that if you receive an allotment, we have proposed to bring a higher performance standard to these projects, both during demolition and to building performance. And I will say that Mr. Guth's comments, and we've talked a little bit about this, this is the piece that he's referring to in his comments, are these building performance standards. And we have a little bit of discussion, more specific discussion about that at the towards the end of the discussion tonight. But we've got members of our building department here who can go into the details on that topic if you like. But I think the use of the allotment system to kind of limit demolition and then to have those projects meet some performance standards, I think are a very big part of staff's proposal. I do think just a couple of other ideas. The 40% demolition threshold that's in the land use code right now is not changing. We're not changing the way that we really measure demolition at this time. We are bringing some more clarity around exemptions and exceptions for different kinds of activity. One of the, I think, more significant one, well, actually two, I think, significant ones that we're proposing is that if you have an HPC project that has non-historic additions and HPC thinks it's better for the resource to remove those additions, that would not count towards your demolition. Currently, those would. And then also, if you're doing a fairly significant remodel on your home and you open up the roof structure and there's black mold and you need to remove a section of your roof, that would not count towards your demolition calculations. Those are some things that have caused consternation, I think, for both staff and the development community over time. Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. So it sounds like on the first one, that if they were then going to be rebuilding some of that space, it would be mitigated.
It would certainly be mitigated.
Correct.
But it would not be counted
triggering
towards
the
a
demolition issue.
and needing an allotment, et cetera.
Right, and so I can understand that. And then on the second one, are you framing it as a health concern or health issue?
Absolutely.
That needs to be
and
remediated.
Specifically around, health issues like, and this is fairly common, mold, also asbestos mitigation.
Okay.
If you get into a wall structure and there's asbestos products, right now, if you took down that wall structure, that would count towards your demolition calculation. You might trigger demolition kind of inadvertently or unintentionally. And now we're bringing some clarity to that issue.
Okay, thank you. It seems like, would there be a requirement for people to test for asbestos first or anything like that?
Well, I think it's ultimately up to that kind of determination would be up to the chief building official, and certainly that is part of building code practice of trying to understand that. But sometimes,
Yeah, you find it after the fact.
Older homes,
Yeah.
you do your best to try to identify these projects early on, and you don't really know until you open up a wall structure or roof structure.
Okay. Thank you.
So I think, again, we can talk about any of these topics in more detail, but I think that I do want to say, because I do think that there's been some confusion as we've talked with the community, this only applies to single-family and duplex development. This does not apply to multifamily, does not apply to commercial, does not apply to lodge. We're talking specifically about single-family and duplex. The topic of demolition has implications to those other types of development. But in terms of these code changes, it's only for single-family and duplex. And I just wanted to kind of reiterate that because I do think there's been some confusion out in the community. Okay. Yes.
I have questions there.
Sure.
When I was going through this, I started thinking to myself about the threshold of 6.
Okay.
And I was wondering if a applicant came in for demolition, and they were making preparations for recycling, reuse of their materials, meaning not sending whatever percentage of their demolition to the landfill. Do we have a process where that gets consideration, or would that just be one of the 6? And
Isn't that part of the performance standards now, that
That's-
anyone would have to do that?
And if you wouldn't mind, Mr. Mayor, the performance standards writ large for these is one of the topics I'd like to go into a little bit more detail towards the end, and that's specifically addressed. But I think it's a great conversation, but if we can hold that that discussion until later, just so I'm not skipping around on slides.
And excuse me a second, just the nonconformities must be resolved. This is for something that is a nonconforming lot. If they demolish, can they rebuild on a nonconforming lot, or are they prohibited?
No, well, let's break that apart a little bit. So nonconformities, when we use that term generally in the land use code, we have a whole chapter on in the land use code on nonconformities. You can have nonconforming uses, you can have nonconforming structures. And basically what that means is that those things were legally established at some point. They were built, or we gave an approval back 40 years ago. And we have since changed the land use code that brings those projects, whether it be about floor area or height or setbacks or use, the use of a particular property. And so that, under our current code right now, that's really the only consequence of demolishing your house, is that if you've got a house that is too big for the zone district and you demolish it right now, the new house has to come back into conformance with the current underlying zoning. Now, because of some of the other changes that we're making around demolition, there are some other requirements that come into play once demolition is triggered. Previously, those nonconformities. So when you say a nonconforming lot, we're talking about typically a lot that's smaller than the minimum lot size in a district. Right now, the sort of across the board, if we're changing some of the language around 100% affordable projects, but otherwise, you get a minimum development right of a single-family home on a non-conforming lot.
Yeah. Just to add to that, and you could help clarify if I state it wrong, but, the very definition of a non-conforming building is that, you can keep it, you can maintain it, but you cannot add to it, and you can't just replace it.
Yeah.
Because it's not conforming anymore. But you could keep it for 1,000 years if you just rebuild it and keep it exactly the same footprint. Is that pretty much correct?
That's absolutely true, and I think under the current code, it's one of the reasons why that 40% demolition threshold is very important to projects. And so if you have a non-conforming project, particularly in terms of floor area where there's value in each of those square feet, you're staying underneath that 40% threshold. In our new code, that stays the same. If you stay underneath your 40% threshold, don't trigger demolition, your nonconformity can continue.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I was just thinking, is that literally when you have that non-conforming status, it's, you're kind of good to go as long as you just stay with what you have, but you cannot increase it or replicate it again at the same level.
Or change the use.
That would be a different issue, but potentially, if, I'd let him go in on that one.
Yeah, no, I think use is similar, and we've got similar provisions. I will just say, like, one recent example is that we had a non-conforming duplex in a zone district that doesn't allow duplexes. It was built back in the 60s. It was annexed into the city, and it was there. The home had a fire. And so duplex isn't an allowed use in that zone district. But because the home was destroyed by an act of God, they were able to reestablish that duplex. Had they torn it down voluntarily,
No,
it would have had to revert to a single-family home following demolition.
it seems fair.
Any other questions on this topic? Happy to talk further we'll talk more in detail about the residential demolition and redevelopment standards towards the end of the presentation. Affordable housing mitigation. This is the second, I think, primary policy change. This is a continuation of tabled Ordinance 24. Again, for council's and the public's clarity, if this resolution is eventually adopted, Ordinance 24 would go away, and these changes would be built into the ordinance that you're considering this evening. The big, I think, changes here is that we're including subgrade, we're including garages, basements in the calculation, and we're also proposing to eliminate the credit for existing floor area. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to generation mitigation. We have, as we talked with you at the work session, we have brought the deferral agreement for locals into a more predictable sort of outcome for them into the future by using CPI rather than language about using the land use code at the time you come back to pay it, which I do agree has some uncertainty associated with it. And we are continuing to work on the update to the residential employment generation study. We do have spreadsheets that were shared with you. The report will be to you as part of your second reading packet. The affordable housing review process. This is, again, to try to make affordable housing projects that are otherwise comply with the land use code more streamlined in their review, more predictable in their review. And the big mechanism for doing that is to shift that to an administrative review. Additional opportunities for affordable housing in the zone districts. This is the kind of fourth area of major policy change. We've gone into the zone districts and I think tried to accomplish two things. Follow direction that was very clear in the community and from council that we wanted to see affordable housing across the city and opportunities for affordable housing across the city. But if those opportunities were going to play out, that we wanted new development to be consistent with the kind of neighborhood character, the dimensions that are present in the land use code currently, and that we wanted new affordable housing to kind of fit within those already established dimensions. And so other than a couple locations where the kind of floor area was unclear, we have not proposed any changes for either floor area or height or anything else sort of to accommodate that, respectful of that, I think that pretty clear community direction that we weren't going to be changing dimensions in any way. Questions about that or anything since last questions? Okay. I will say one of the things that from council direction, we have proposed the prohibition of new residential units within the mixed-use zone districts. This is identical to code changes that have happened with some of our other zone districts, particularly in the commercial core, but we would apply those same standards that would not allow a change of use of existing properties in the mixed use to be converted to free market residential. And then I do think that because of the interrelatedness of sections of the land use code, again, I think we conveyed this to you at the work session, there are some fairly minor changes across the land use code to support those four policy objectives. Some of them we're taking away a word or changing a definition. We did make some fairly significant changes, though, to calculations and measurements related to floor area, new definitions for floor area and demolition. We gave some flexibility for kind of energy performance upgrades and setbacks and heights. We've talked a little bit about those two topics. And then demolition, we've got a new section of land use code. We gave some clarity to how we calculate demo, but didn't really change that calculation in any meaningful way. And then that new section also is the location for where we have the adoption of residential demolition and redevelopment standards. And then again, those were kind of the two areas where there were most significant changes in support, but we have kind of 8 other sections of the land use code, partially why your packet or why the ordinance is 185 pages was the inclusion of these sections, but did make changes to definitions. The next two, the ComDev Community Development Department and P&Z, we're simply giving some clarification around the authority around the evaluation of the demolition topic. Made some very minor changes to nonconformities related to the definition of demolition. We needed to create an appeals path around determinations around demolition, special review for projects that are proposing a variation for demolition. We needed to, if affordable housing projects were going to be administrative, we needed the issuance of affordable housing credits to also be administrative. And then this is, to give you a sense, this last one is a change that we are proposing for second reading. It's not included in your first reading packet. We realize that in impact fees, the calculation of our other impact fees that we have outside of affordable housing are all based on that sort of old conception of floor area. And without going into the study of those other impact fees, we didn't want to change that relationship. So we're making sure that impact fees continue to, the other non-affordable housing impact fees are using that older definition of floor area. Okay, so this is where I'd like to have a little bit more of a specific conversation. These were topics that council at the work session wanted some additional information on. And then the last of these topics is I think some updates from staff about the mitigation study, and I think some discretion that council has about where to set that generation rate. So the 4 topics, the demolition allotment process. This was particularly a request from Councilor Mesereau. We've got a graphic that kind of shows how that'll work out. We do want to talk about the demolition and redevelopment standards and exactly what those components are, and this might, hopefully will answer the mayor's question from a few minutes ago. We also, since we last met, have had some great conversations with the Historic Preservation Commission about that intersection of affordable housing projects and their design review. And then lastly, this question on the employee generation. So those are the 4 topics I'd like to give a little bit more time to. Okay. Our friends at Design Workshop did some nice animations on this, but just so that we had a PDF of this rather than PowerPoint, I got rid of the animation. So it's going to be static up here, but we can kind of go through. So step 1 of this, very briefly, is that in order to get into the demolition allotment process, you have to do a pre-application meeting with staff and get and this is a very standard part of our land use application process. It just lets you know what the application requirements are. Step 2 is that you then hand us in an application with the requirements. This next step is the big one. We take that application in and review it for completeness. It's really that determination of completeness that is going to be the way that you get in line to get a demolition allotment. The next slide kind of explains this a little bit more. But if you present to us an application that doesn't have the required elements and we have to send it back to you to give us more stuff, your place in line.
You're not in line yet.
You're not in line yet until your application is determined as complete. And so that completeness determination is really important here. If your application is determined complete, you go up to step 4. Are there allotments available? If the answer is yes, we do kind of administrative review between ComDev and the other referral agencies. But if the answer is no, you've got a couple choices. One, you can wait till next year when the next set of development allotments are available. The other option to you is to pursue a multi-year allotment with City Council. This is a review with City Council. It's a land use application. It's done by ordinance. It's a fairly serious thing. And this is where, and I'll show you the review criteria in just a second for that, but this is a review that's been in the land use code for a long time, particularly when we were using development allotments more regularly than we are right now. And there was competition for them, and there were years where there weren't enough allotments. So there is a path if you have a project and the 6 allotments are spoken for in a given year. There is a path for you to try to get another allotment, or you can wait till next year. But let's say that you are complete, you've got an allotment. We do a fairly quick review within the Community Development Department, talk to any referral agencies that we need to talk to. It's a fairly cursory review at this point, because a lot of the detail about your project is going to be determined ultimately at building permit. If the answer after step 6 is no, we're going to issue an administrative notice of approval to you. It gets recorded. There's 3 years of vesting that's associated with it, meaning that you'd have to submit for your building permit within 3 years. There is, I think, some circumstances where a project might need a variation from some of the standards that are there. If they don't like some of the things or need some flexibility in some of the performance standards, there is a path for them to go to P&Z. P&Z approves that, that variation. Similarly, they'd be granted an allotment with a 3-year vesting authority. Any questions about this? We talked about this kind of at a pretty high level during the work session. This gives a little bit of detail to the path.
Any questions here?
Yeah, I think it's a great graph, and I think you should literally include it in the ordinance so that when people are looking at it, they understand their steps.
Okay. Well, I will say, it may be, the ordinance, I'll think about if there's a section at the end that we could include this in. Certainly, this is going to be included in the materials that we prepare both for staff and for the community as we kind of roll out these changes. I'll talk with our legal counsel to see if it's appropriate to include something like this in the ordinance, but I think that it may be that it's best to keep it in our policy and procedures at ComDev. But we'll investigate that.
Ben?
Yes.
Only question for me perhaps is that complete and incomplete application. Some of that is reliant on it being reviewed and given back with what's needed. How do we feel in that process? Is that manageable? Is it equitable? And like?
We have applications that come into to community development. Sometimes the completeness determination is kind of a non-issue, because there's not a tight timeline, or I think the sort of idea of completeness as the moratorium came into view and folks were submitting applications at the last minute and we were having conversations about completeness at that moment. I will say that the things that are going to be required for submission for these projects are going to be fairly minimal. Again, a lot of the requirements are going to be kind of pushed off till building permit. So in terms of like the complexity of the application, they're going to be relatively simple. There won't likely be many of them. Maybe this as we hit August 8th, we'll have to make some decisions about this. But I do think that this is going to be one of the set of land use applications that when we get them in, staff is going to have to be a little bit more attentive than we usually are on the process for determining completeness, recording those, logging them in when we get them, really keeping track of the correspondence that we're having with applicants about things that their applications have and what they don't have. And so I do think it's going to require some additional responsibility from staff to be a little bit more attentive to the process and the timing of all that than we are on something that doesn't have the same kind of time constraints. So certainly there's a realization from us that we've got to be a little bit more attentive because of the precision that's going to be necessary here.
Thank you.
But I
And
think
do you
it's a
see
good question.
on August 8th that 6 allotments will be given, first come, first serve?
That's correct.
And then I can envision it just hypothetically that there are 8 people that have applications, 6 of them get in. Do they have to wait until January 1st to hit send, or how does that work? They can work between August 8th and January 1st to make sure it's complete.
Yeah.
Then they submit it.
It is not our intention at this point, less, council direction to the contrary, to put projects on a wait list. The tracking of that, the fairness of that, et cetera, I think causes some difficulties. I do think it's going to require us to kind of see how things roll out. I think that this process is new. I think that this, I think we have a fairly good understanding of the historic trend of demolition projects, but it may be that there are more of these than we think they're going to be, and there's going to be a little bit more pressure on the system. But if somebody is again really determined to get an allotment, they can wait to submit on January 1, or they can also pursue this multi-year allotment path, which would be at council discretion to be able to pull out of one of the allotments from 2023 in 2022 at council's discretion.
Just kind of playing this through a little bit. If there are 8 applications that come in fairly quickly. They're standing in line, and you stamp them, date, time, so you have a sequence of them. And then item number 3 and number 4 actually are incomplete, and you would send those back to their potential applicants to fix. And then number 7 and 8 would move up in the queue. Would that kind of be, and be reviewed for how appropriate they are, if they're complete or not as well?
And I think that this graphic, I think kind of explains that exact scenario, where, again, it's a little bit different because we're sort of waiting till we get to the kind of 6th allotment. But in this situation, project number 6 comes into application. We ask them to submit some additional things, and while they're waiting to submit some additional things, project 7 comes in with a complete application. They would get that 6th allotment for the year.
Right, that's what I was saying. And what it strikes me a little bit like people who enter the APSHA lottery, and you got 3rd place, and you're like, well, I lost. But then the first person and the second person don't get mortgages, or they decide they don't really want the unit, and the 3rd person moves up. So they would be kept in some sort of order as they're received, even though it's not a true wait list. That's kind of what I was getting to here.
I think that's right.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Garrow has her hand up, would like to make a comment, if that's okay, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, please. Thank you for. Jessica, are you there?
There we go. Yep. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Gotcha.
Great. Thanks. I just wanted to jump in and reinforce something that Ben said, which is that this is a process that is already established in the land use code. So this multi-year allotment process has been in place for decades, really. And while I don't think the city has seen it recently, it maybe 10, 15 years ago, this was a situation that some projects were in on the commercial side, for instance. And it was difficult to track that. And so there was not some kind of separate wait list to indicate once the allotments were done in 1 year, we were immediately processing that application January 1st or 2nd. That applicant had to make a new application if they chose not to go forward with a multi-year allotment. And so that's how every project works. And I think we would encourage kind of the direction that staff has gone, which is, yes, the demolition allotment is new, but the process should be the same as any other application. So I just wanted to chime in with that. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
And this is probably more information that's appropriate, but this is out of the proposed changes. But if a project came forward to us and there was something about any of the standards that we're proposing that they wanted to find an alternative path around, there is a path with Planning and Zoning Commission through special review, and a couple of standards that I think are clear, but would require kind of alternatives that kind of meet the intent of what we're trying to get at in terms of building performance or demolition performance. And then again, I just wanted to kind of show that there are an established set of review criteria for the multi-year allotment process. And essentially, if a project were to come to City Council requesting one of these allotments, they would have to identify at least 5 of the standards on the right that they would have to show that they're bringing something additional to the city's interest in order to be considered for an additional allotment from the next year.
Ben, let me ask you a question here.
Yes.
On your last comment that there could be special review. And I'm okay with that, but I want to make sure that that doesn't just become an automatic backdoor or a sense that this is an easier, that there's very strong and clear standards given to the P&Z for any sort of special review.
I'm going to skip ahead a little bit just to this slide right here. This is the second topic that I'd like to give a little bit more detail to.
Sure.
And these are the 5 areas where we're going to be asking for new things from these projects. Waste diversion, and let me just give a little bit of detail on this. I think that this is one that a project could ask for a variation on, where, you know, we've been looking at some projects around town very recently who are starting to do some kind of innovative things around this. They're starting to deconstruct rather than demolish and throw in the landfill. They're grinding up waste and sorting out the stuff that they can, you know, pull out with magnets, you know, the metal that they can pull out with magnets. So if a project came to us and said, you know, the 35% by weight, because of the nature of the construction of my home, doesn't really make sense for my project, but I'm really interested in deconstructing and like pulling individual elements apart and finding, you know, markets or recycling opportunities for those kinds of things. Like, I think that that would be something that we could consider as an alternative to just meeting this 35% by weight metric that we've put in place.
Okay.
So that is a kind of variation that I think a project could pursue. On this one, the building energy performance and electrification readiness, I think that this is probably the area where we would see variation requests because of the high standards that our building department is proposing for these projects, where, you know, they might not be able to meet one of the kind of very enumerated requirements, but they're finding alternatives that meet the intent, that are putting forward a highly performing building, but that might not meet the letter of the law. So I think those are the two areas where I think where we could see some requests for variations, but I think that they have to kind of pursue the same intent,
Yeah.
if they're going to be approved by P&Z.
You know, again, and I just want to make sure that they're really given strong footing to stand on in reviewing these, and that you know, I guess I was confusing for a moment the special review to try to get an extra demolition permit versus a special review to try to get a variation from some of the standards.
Yeah.
And either way, I still want to make sure that they don't become a backdoor because it's easier. And that we've set them up for a bunch of hearings that they don't need to be having on top of their other workload, so that they really have very clear standards and criteria upon which to say, yes, this one does deserve a variance, and this one doesn't.
Yeah.
And they're not feeling uncomfortable, oh, I already gave one, I have to give the next three.
Yeah. I think it's a very fair question and concern. I will say that we have special review opportunities for
A lot of things.
lots of other aspects in the land use code, and to be fair, it's not a review that we see a whole lot of, because that intent requirement is present in a lot of them, that you have to, while you might be pursuing an alternative, you've got to meet that intent of what the objective is trying to
Thank you.
propose. Okay, I'm going to go back just so that we're not going too far out of order. So, and Mr. Mayor, I think this is a response to your question earlier on waste diversion. During demolition and during construction of a redeveloped home, we are going to be requiring participation in the waste tracking program that Pickens County uses at the landfill. Program's also known as Green Halo, and a project, if they get one of these demolitions, has to participate in that program. And the metric for diversion is 35% by weight of the demolition waste has to be diverted. And we think that that's primarily going to be in terms of concrete and metal. That's what Pickens County landfill is seeing at this time as in terms of the things that are diverted. Pickens County's threshold right now is 25%. And based on the feedback that we've received, 25% seems like a very easy threshold. Most projects are very easily able to meet that threshold, and we wanted to sort of expand that requirement a little bit higher. Right now, the easy to recycle products at the landfill are concrete and metal. We're hopeful that, you know, over time, there's additional projects that have kind of local sources or local markets for kind of recycled material coming out of construction. But right now, we think this is a good place to start.
And then I guess my question would be, if we were to set a standard for additional demolition permitting, and somebody comes in and says, you know what, we're going to be diverting 50%. And I just want to bring this, I'm not advocating for this right now. I'm just making, maybe there's an opportunity here to forward some of our goals. But anyway, something like that, 50%, 60% outside, and whether that needs to run outside of the 6 allotments that are there. I'm just looking for opportunities where we can encourage effective and environmental demolition in that respect. So I was thinking about, as I was going through this, I was just thinking about the volumetrics.
Sure.
Not just the number and the quantity, but the volumetrics that you're getting at here. And that was, I don't know, I just want to put that out there.
I think a couple things I would respond to. One is we have intentionally set this document outside of the land use code, so that over time, as we have a year of this program under our belt, and we're like, oh, these projects aren't having any problem meeting this threshold, and City Council wants to sort of keep taking that threshold higher and higher, this document can be easily amended over time. It requires basically for us to come to an action item, not outside of a public hearing. We don't need to go through a full ordinance process, et cetera. So one is that this whole set of standards is fairly malleable over time. The second piece I would say is that under the scenario that you just described, if a project wanted to pursue one of the multi-year allotments, what you just described would be one of the things that we would be looking for in a project to qualify under that review criteria as one of the sort of, additional performance that you could use to consider whether or not to grant them a multi-year allotment.
And Ben, I just wanted to ask you, because it's hard to know exactly how, remember how they manage the landfill, things like that. And I fully believe that 35% of the waste being concrete and metals clearly would be the target. But what I'm trying to recall is, are they actually out there grinding wood, and so the wood would be putting into compost or things like that? Or what would Pickens County landfill do with a load that comes in that they can do something with? I mean, to get additional.
I'm going to let Garrett answer this. He's looked into this topic
research.
much more than I.
Great, thank you.
So it's a good question, and I think one of the things that we've discovered through this process is there's a lot of people that are interested and motivated in pursuing these ends, but what is the struggle is there's not a lot of infrastructure to support these things. So in other communities, like in the San Francisco Bay Area, they have ample land, there's numerous building material reuse stores that they can stockpile boulders from the site and old timber, and they can sell it. And so we're really kind of constrained in the infrastructure to support a recycling and reuse program, but it's starting. And with Pickens County's waste diversion requirements, the landfill is starting to move more in that direction. I think they've had some advertisements in the paper recently about a mercantile that they have there that's kind of like Restore, where you can go buy reused and recycled materials. So that's kind of all part of this energy and this momentum that's building around this topic. And so we're trying to kind of work within the bounds of what exists right now. And in addition to the infrastructure, there's also got to be a market, a secondary market for it. And that's also been identified as a bit of a challenge here. But things are happening. Contractors are interested in pursuing this. Pickens County is, the landfill is, and right now there's infrastructure and a market for reused and recycled concrete and metal. So that's kind of where the opportunity is. But wood, drywall, carpet, asphalt shingles, those are all kind of the next step that we hope this kind of framework and foundation, we can build upon this to eventually grind up wood and be more purposeful about recycling and reusing wood products. Right now, there's a couple of projects in town where they've begun to process their waste in a different way. So instead of just throwing it all in a container and taking it to as unsorted construction and demolition waste, they grind it down so that it's more compact, and it can actually be used as daily cover for waste, which is a better use and more efficient use of space. And also it has a lower carbon footprint when you process it like that. So there are things that are happening. There's contractors that are moving in this direction. There's definitely some synergy around kind of moving this forward, and this is just supposed to, intended to be a kind of a framework and a foundation that we can build upon.
That's a great answer. Thank you.
Did you by chance look at any regional opportunities in that same way? So our neighboring counties or even Grand Junction, are there any of these, are these burgeoning in those areas?
I think the same answer kind of applies to the regional. There is limited infrastructure and kind of a market for those materials, and it is growing. It's coming on the radar for a lot of those communities, but we're at the pretty early stage. So yes, there is a regional kind of approach to some of these topics, but they're in a similar position to where we are in Pickett County.
Thanks.
These next two standards are simply reporting only. At this point, I think we're sort of out ahead of a lot of communities on these topics. They're topics that I think are happening nationally and internationally about trying to better understand the impacts of the built environment. But unembodied carbon, kind of the life cycle, kind of value of the materials that are being used in new construction, it's still in its infancy, to be frank, and we'd like to use this to start gathering some data about what's possible, what kind of information is out in the market on these products, and so we are going to be requiring for the concrete, cement, and metal that are being used in a residential construction product, what are called environmental product declarations that start to give us some idea about the life cycle embodied carbon of some of these products. This is definitely its infancy. This is definitely an experiment, and we're going to see what kind of data and information we can get from this requirement. We're not setting any thresholds for requirements. It's simply giving us information about materials that are being used in the new construction. Similarly, but I think we have more of an infrastructure for this already in place in the city of Aspen with the work that our climate action team has done around the Building IQ program. These projects, once they're built out, will be required to participate in our Building IQ benchmarking efforts around energy performance for homes. Right now, the Building IQ is, as passed by council, is for commercial and multifamily buildings only. This would add single-family duplex properties that went through this demolition allotment process to participate in Building IQ as well. Again, simply a reporting requirement, no sort of performance threshold within the Building IQ other than giving us data. In my view, these are the most significant of the requirements that are going to be assessed on these projects. And I think that this was ultimately what Mr. Guth was responding to. These are energy building performance standards and readiness for electrification. Not requirement to electrify, not requirements to do PV and battery storage, but that projects as they're being designed are ready for that moving forward. I will also say that these are requirements that are likely going to be incorporated into the Building and Energy Code adoption that's coming later in 2020, likely in 2022. And so this is kind of our first introduction to these things, but our building department's been working quite a bit on these requirements, and they're likely going to be part of the adoption that you're going to be seeing later this year.
And how late in this year? We're talking this taking effect August 8th, so it's getting towards the end of the year already.
There's a couple members of the building department here that could speak to that a little bit more definitively than I, but in general, they've been working on this for the last couple of years. I think this process has given a little impetus to them to kind of speed up some of the things that they were considering and working on with their consultant team. And I would say in the second half of 2022, but I'd let Dennis and Bonnie answer to that if they would.
Yes, Mayor, we've been working on the 2021 edition of the code and the amendment package based on the May 21 meeting with the presentation.
Yeah, come on up. Thanks, Dennis.
From the meeting that we had that Bonnie and Nick put together for you guys, a presentation in May last year, we took that direction and we were trying to make that applicable to our 2021 adoption. This accelerated that effort to make us amend our current adoption to capture the homes that are going to get the allotment on after August. So we are diligently working on refining all of our codes, and then with a special emphasis on the energy package, which this package is kind of a start to where our 21 is going to be. But we didn't want to miss this opportunity with this moratorium to not capture those homes because that adoption's not in place. So essentially, the ideas we've been working on with the 2021, we've incorporated into our current 2015, and that's what the appendix is to this document. It's pretty aggressive, and that's the direction we got from you guys in May of last year.
Yeah, and so this is really effective for building permits. So I'm just projecting that it's going to be a very small window where this is going to be effective for new development.
Yeah, I do think it's important. You know, one of the things I would say about this document in general and about the demolition allotment in general is when the moratorium was declared, whether it was engineering standards, which we can talk about in just a second, or building, the moratorium kind of landed in the middle of these other efforts that other departments were making. And so the kind of intersection of the moratorium timing with the work that Dennis and his team have been doing and engineering has been doing on some of these topics, like the timing of that wasn't great to fully incorporate and fully build. I will say that we do think that this is a really important framework moving forward. So these projects that are getting a demolition allotment now, they're going to be subject to the requirements that Dennis and his team are going to be bringing generally to our building and energy codes moving forward. But I do think as the city starts to bring to the fore new policies, perhaps around electrification, perhaps around photovoltaic and battery storage, that this is going to be the location where those kinds of things can land as a kind of a starting point for projects that are moving forward. And so this is where we are right now. I think it's a snapshot in time about where different processes were with different departments, but I do think that moving forward, this is a place where those kinds of initiatives can land as the city sort of moves forward on different policy areas.
I'd just like to remind those out there that are listening that greenhouse gas reduction and climate change are one of the top 3 goals of this city council, and that this certainly, the moratorium had a bunch of connections to the environment in the Aspen area community plan, so I think it's appropriate that it is addressed here. Thank you.
Ward, I agree with you entirely, and I don't have time to look up the article, but I had read this morning that about 100 million Americans are under heat advisory today because the temperatures are so extreme. They're advised to stay indoors, avoid outside exercise, don't die of heat exhaustion. And bicyclists just did die on the Palisade Plunge in Mesa County, had run out of water, and it's a very hot desert there. They were hitting over 100 every day. So you know, dealing with climate change is dealing with health as much as anything else, even though we might not immediately see the connections. Thank you.
Thanks.
And I actually have one other little thing that's different to add on to this. You know, I live over in Hunter Creek, and it used to be Silver King. And I can't turn on 2 different appliances in my living room at the same time without blowing a fuse, you know? And so I think they weren't prepared for what people were going to have in their homes, whether it's a flat screen TV or a computer or an air fryer back then. And we need to make sure homes that are built now are prepared for the electric load that they're going to be carrying. And I think that that's a really important component. That's all. Thanks.
Thanks.
And then the last, thank you, Dennis. The last of the requirements under this is that right now, if you're building a home, one of the easy ways to deal with your stormwater, and when I say easy, it's not really easy because you have to engage in a lot of underground engineering to do this, but it's a technology called dry wells where you can treat a lot of your stormwater kind of on-site with a lot of underground infrastructure. Our engineering department, while certainly allowed under our current standards, would like to move to more to less engineered responses to stormwater. And so this would require that on a new project, getting a demolition allotment, that at least 50% of their site's impervious area has to be treated in above grade bioretention areas, pervious pavers, tree canopies, et cetera. You could still do a portion of your stormwater management and dry wells, but it's trying to move away from that as the one solution to stormwater management, and to get away from, requires a lot of concrete, it requires a lot of digging, requires,
It'd be very expensive.
it's expensive, and it requires
A lot of energy.
time and energy and material to do.
That's a good one.
Okay. This next topic is a fairly brief one. We had this conversation with you at the work session. When we go to affordable housing projects that are 100% compliant with the land use code, we're moving those to administrative reviews, proposing that. But there was an intersection, and the intersection, I think, has been made very obvious by some high-profile discussions that have been happening in the community over individual projects. So we had this conversation with HPC and our historic preservation staff. I want to thank particularly Amy Simon for kind of navigating this outcome, because I think it's a good one. We've differentiated projects that are designated in a historic district that don't have an asset on them. So you could think of a property on Main Street that doesn't have a historic resource on it, and then projects that do contain a historic resource. Projects that don't have a resource on it will remain administrative. HP staff and a monitor from HPC would look at a few review criteria. And then on the projects that do contain a historic resource, we did not want to give up historic HPC's authority around preservation and location of historic resources. So if a property does have a historic resource on it, they want to pursue 100% affordable housing, HPC, the project will start with HPC. They'll get a chance to look at the location, the kind of preservation of the resource, additions to the property that were non-historic that HPC would like to have review over. And then at that point, once HPC approves those items, the rest of the project would go back to that administrative review. So that the new construction, for example, the 1020 East Cooper project, the new construction in the rear would have been reviewed administratively for dimension, for compliance with the land use code otherwise. And so HPC review will simply be limited to the preservation location of the resource itself. That seems to be reflective of the direction the council gave to us at the end of the work session a few weeks ago. We think it's a good solution, and that solution has currently been built into the code.
One of the odd but biggest things often that is glaring is when color choices are wrong, the aesthetics. It's not necessarily the design sometimes. Is that something that they would have any input, or when you talked about that kind of, not oversight, but a liaison to say, hey, blaze orange, for the new sunrise housing is really just not going to fit in the neighborhood or something?
I think I'm channeling the HP staff when I would say that we do not have authority over color.
Okay.
In their review. Now, they do over materiality, they do over form, and making sure the form of the building, has, if we're talking about
characteristics.
has some, if it doesn't have a resource on it, that it's got to be somewhat reflective of, the kind of architectural character of
Nearby
and.
Okay.
But in terms of color, no.
That's not it?
We don't have anything in our design guidelines currently.
Okay.
And
That's
I
fine.
think
That's fine. I'm just kind of wondering.
I think our HPC would prefer to keep it that way.
Okay. I'll take that.
Okay.
Well, there's the old tale about how Herbert Bayer and Pepke's would buy paint for
They offered to.
whoever, but the catch was they got to pick the color.
Yeah. And,
Right,
and
not the homeowner.
nobody got any of the paint, pretty much.
Nobody wanted the paint.
And I do just want to kind of emphasize on in both of these situations that I think in the conversation that we had with HPC, I think because there are the review criteria that they tend to look at and enforce on properties will be kind of enforced by staff in their review and, kind of in consultation with a member of the HP board within that administrative review, that there was comfort with this process.
Okay.
Unanimously, they supported it after a really robust conversation. So I think it's a good outcome.
Very good.
All righty. Okay. We will try to move through this as expeditiously as possible. I will say that this is the one topic I would appreciate some eventual direction from council on. There was an op-ed column in one of our papers a couple weeks ago talking about this topic specifically, that described this as an algebra equation with some predetermined outcomes that city staff was trying to arrive at. And the article went on to say that it's not about policy, it's about an algebra equation. I completely agree with the description of this as an algebra equation. We have 4 variables that we're dealing with. Where I would disagree with the column is that I do think that in each of these variables, there are policy choices in each of these variables and where council decides to land. But the four levers that we have are what counts, floor area, that's the topic of Ordinance 24, and including basements and garages and the credit for existing floor area. Last time we talked with council, we asked the question about mitigation rate for single family and duplex. It's currently at 100% mitigation rate. That was council direction wanted us to keep it at 100%. And then the fee-in-lieu, we updated it back in 2021. We're proposing a nearly 8.5% increase. So those 3 levers are kind of resolved if we agree with the outcomes of Ordinance 24, and now included in this. One of these that I do think that we still have kind of outstanding, and that we do, I think, council has discretion over, is the employee generation rate. When we tabled Ordinance 24, you gave us direction to pursue a new employee generation study. We've been working on that with our consultant, RRC. We've gotten calculations. Again, the kind of supporting report to explain those calculations are en route and will be to us as soon as possible, but certainly for your second reading packet. Currently, that number is 0.16 FTE per 1,000 square feet. RRC study, and this is an excerpt from one of their, from the construction portion of their mitigation estimate. They basically, and without getting into too much detail, but again, happy to go into the weeds, and I will also say that the consultant will be with us at second reading if you have really specific conversations about their methodology. But essentially, we took construction valuation for actual projects that have happened in Aspen. They went into national and county level data sets for Pickens County and Garfield County and looked at what the economic productivity of an individual worker is. They did some further math. You can see their kind of order of operations there. Average construction worker per 1,000 square feet is just above 4. We did do a conservative kind of step downward. The same group, RRC, were responsible for the regional housing study. And when they did that analysis, they figured out that all the construction workers that work in our area, they all are holding on to approximately 1.24 jobs. So each worker actually has more jobs than workers. So we did some division to actually bring the number down further to kind of acknowledge that. At the end of the calculation, over a 40-year career, or kind of taking into account a 40-year career for a construction worker, they've landed on the construction piece at 0.81 FTEs per 1,000 square feet.
0.08.
0.08, excuse me. Yeah, that's a big difference. Excuse me. Sorry, let me go backwards. I jumped ahead. Okay. So 0.01 FTE per 1,000 square feet. To get to the total generation rate, you add construction, operations, and maintenance. So the next piece of this, and I didn't show you the table for this because it's a big table that's expands over a spreadsheet. We'll have it better illuminated for you in the report. But looking at operations maintenance, under their evaluation, operations and maintenance per 1,000 square feet is 0.103 FTEs. And I want to say a little bit about this piece of the equation. This data is difficult to get at. I think it's super important. I think council's identified the importance of operations and maintenance, understanding the generation of that. I think that the community has acknowledged that these homes have a lot of services associated with them. They're complicated buildings that require a lot of maintenance over time. But getting at that number is difficult. We can't just go out to property managers and say, hey, how many people do you have working on a house in a given year? A lot of them under non-disclosure agreements. We've heard from locals who are concerned about what we're doing with mitigation, who say, I shovel my own snow. I don't have a private chef. My operations and maintenance for my home is significantly less than these other homes. So we do acknowledge that these generalized numbers that we came up with on the ground, there's huge variability across properties. We do acknowledge also that as we propose taking away the credit for existing floor area, this is the piece that I think you could make an argument for, that if you included the entirety of this and you took away, the sort of credit for existing floor area, that this is the piece that has kind of a lifespan of a home associated with it. And then also, because you folks are looking at STR fees and taxes, we do think that there's some intersection with the employee generation for operations and maintenance and with properties that operate all the time or part-time and short-term rentals. So taking all those into consideration, like thinking about this part of the equation, I think requires a little bit more analysis. So you can see them put together here and comparing with what we currently have. 2015 to 2022, construction has gone downward a little bit, mostly because of that conservative reduction that we did, acknowledging that each worker has more than one job. Operations and maintenance, this is a little bit difficult to compare because in our 2015 study, we differentiated homes above 4,500 square feet and found that primarily through surveys that homes that were above 4,500 square feet had a much higher operations and maintenance cost associated with them. But the number that we've landed on in 2022 fits I think, solidly within that range that we found in 2015. And the combined total, 0.184 per thousand square feet, again fits in between the kind of two rates that we have currently in the land use code between 0.16 and 0.36 FTEs, for that total sort of generation requirement. Again, the current number is 0.16. So not a significant change with this study, kind of in the ballpark. To show you kind of, and this is where I think we need to go back in time a little bit, the big change that we've had recently was in 2015, where we had a new study. The employee generation rate was kind of brought downward as a result of the study. But other aspects of those full levers of mitigation kind of remained. And so as a consequence, you can see kind of the downward trend in 2015 using the scenario that we have above, which is a fairly typical scenario, where we can look at what happened to the mitigation requirement in terms of FTEs and then based on fee-in-lieu. If we were to do all the things and use all the levers at the max, count all the floor area, use our current fee-in-lieu, use the 100% mitigation rate, and use the maximum generation rate, on the far right, you see the total impact of that. For that same home, we translate into a fundamentally different mitigation requirement. And that's using the full generation amount that RRC has arrived at 0.184 FTEs. That is a choice that council has. You could choose to sort of max out all four of those levers. And I can go back and talk about specific aspects of this. You've seen this table a couple times, but I can talk in more detail about it if you have questions. But this is where we're getting to the punchline of this. The four colored bars are kind of representing these four levers. We've got what counts. Staff feels that that's pretty maxed out. We're counting all the floor area now. We're counting 100% generation. We've got a fee-in-lieu that we think is defensible in its amount, and we're proposing an increase based on inflation. Staff, I think, is making a recommendation that would reduce the operations and maintenance portion of the mitigation rate, or excuse me, of the generation rate, our recommendation is at 0.25, at 25% of operations and maintenance. And so if you look at the second column in where it says generation rate, you can see that there is a change. The first line is 100% construction and not including any operations and maintenance. The second line is a 25% of operations and maintenance, keeping all the construction. Third is 50%. And the last is the kind of full inclusion of the generation rate. If you run that through the calculation, the first choice, if we just use the construction mitigation, it would be a 3 times increase over current. If we included 25%, it would be a 4 times increase over current. And you can go down the list to the full, using all the levers fully maxed out, generation rate, mitigation rate, what counts, fee in lieu. You come to the sort of landing point at 7 times what we're currently mitigating or requiring for mitigation, and the approximate value under a current fee in lieu. Staff, because of the topics that we raised here, is recommending reducing that operations and maintenance generation rate down to 25% of what these folks are supporting, or that they argue that we could support that 0.184. We're arguing for a reduction in that, so that we would be on this second line down where we include the entirety of the construction generation. We include 25% of the operations and maintenance with a generation of 0.107, translating into the outcomes in terms of total mitigation requirements that you see to the right there.
The 4 time.
Mm-hmm.
Let me drill down a second or two more here
Please.
on this. Particularly, I wanted to ask what we include in operations and maintenance. I mean, I would tend to think that, and I'm thinking more, after it's built, are the maintenance is the lawn and irrigation system and the pool person, but is it also other amenity people like masseuse or cook?
There were.
I mean, those are running the house, or the butler.
Yes. There were, in your packet, it was Exhibit 7, and I can pull it up if you like. There was a list of the jobs that were included in the operations and maintenance. And they were primarily around exactly what you described. Repair people, folks that would, what's that?
Upkeep.
Upkeep. More seasonal kinds of work like landscaping and landscaping, snow removal, et cetera. There were some catering jobs, those kinds of things were associated with them. Housekeepers, kind of folks that are kind of generally associated with running of households were included in those. And they're using labor codes that the National Bureau of Labor Statistics uses. And so we actually had some fairly extensive conversations about which jobs to include and not. And we made some specific choices, like I think we excluded trash collection, for example.
Right.
Which seemed more generalized and not specific, not specific to a particular property. So we did make some choices around that. There was kind of a large list, and we sort of narrowed that down to a shorter list of jobs. But I think they're exactly sort of what you're describing.
Okay, yeah, no, I realize that averages are always abnormals on either side squished into the middle. But you do tend to think about houses that might have a housekeeper 5 days a week, and that's one full-time person. It's not a 0.25 person if they're working there 40 hours a week, whereas someone else might have someone come in once every 2 weeks.
Right.
And that's it. So I can understand, again, how averages work out like that. And then the second question is, this is, again, pretty specific to the activity of that single-family home as a residence, certainly not as an STR. Those are other things that we're looking at over there. And the potential to mitigate the impact from STRs on housing issues is something we've determined we'd like to try to settle via a ballot question.
That's correct.
Okay. Putting all those factors together, I think that it really, I would accept the staff's recommendation of the balance that you have tried to find and strike here. And my logic is that I think the employee generation and mitigation from these homes, I mean, I could be talked into something higher by someone else, but I think that I don't want to create a negative for the ballot question that says, hey, by the way, these new homes all have to pay X. That should take care of the problem. But we know there's only maybe going to be 6 a year or less. You know, you're not going to see this as being a real generator of the great income to start dealing with the housing problem, even when they're charged at these sort of levels, versus the community saying, yes, there should be something that captures the new demand and the new demand for employees, as we saw through the other charts at another work session of the dollar flowing through the economy and creating the jobs that we're now not filling. So I think it's a balance between the two. And this might be something that a council or future councils would have to consider if such a STR tax were to fail, and that does not become part of the revenue for generating the housing that the community needs to service the guests that are coming to stay in these residences. You know, it's a real challenge. I mean, we have people who are building that house and living in it, and we have other people who are building that house and going to rent it out for $100,000 a month, long term. And which will really require more employees, you don't know. So I understand that, you know, trying to find some landing place in the middle of a lot of uncertainty about it. But I can see where you landed, and I can understand why. That's all. Thanks.
Thanks for starting that conversation. I appreciate your comments, Rachel, a lot.
Yeah.
Ward, did you want to chime in here?
Yeah, I have some questions about what counts. I'm not sure that garages should count towards floor area. I think that, this is a question to you guys, what percentage of the residents have mitigated for their floor area? So what I'm getting at is, if they've mitigated for it already and then redeveloping it, I think that they should, I'm thinking they should have credit for the mitigated floor area.
So let me speak to both of those things. I think I can do it fairly efficiently. So I will say that the topic on credits is one of the reasons why we're proposing a reduced operations and maintenance. From staff's view, the construction piece is really easy. If you tear down a home, even if you mitigated, if you tear down a home and you mitigated at the time for that home, and you're building a brand new home with a whole new set of construction impacts, why would we not assess a new mitigation for that new construction activity? Okay, so I think that's my first response. The second response is on the credit for existing. I do think that there is an argument that homes that may have mitigated going back into time, a portion of their mitigation certainly was towards operations and maintenance. But the way that we're calculating this, and I think in the way that it was calculated in 2015, is that was making assumptions about, you know, the long-term operations and maintenance for a home. And so if you've got a home that mitigated in 1985 and you've torn that down and you're building something new, in staff's view, not only should that project be responsible for the generation of the new construction, but you've also extinguished the operations and maintenance that you paid for back in 1985. Now, I will say that it is one of the reasons why we're proposing a reduced generation rate for operations and maintenance. Because I will say that the mitigation patterns over the years in Aspen have been very complicated, and there's lots of different scenarios that would be difficult to capture. For example, you have some properties, this doesn't happen anymore, who did buy-down units as their mitigation, or they built an on-site unit. Staff does think that in those situations, there does need to be an evaluation of the value of that mitigation if it's continuing, of those units, if they're continuing to be used for affordable housing. But that was pretty rare. We also have circumstances where, a home had a significant renovation in, say, 2010, and they didn't tear down the home, and they put some additional floor area, and they might have mitigated for 500 square feet of new additional floor area. Not for the whole house, but just for their additional incremental kind of floor area. And now they're tearing down that home in 2022. Again, I think from staff's view, that credit is one really difficult to assess. We think it's been given carte blanche over time. The credit before didn't make any evaluation whether a home mitigated or not. It just got it.
It just got a credit.
And so I think we're trying to find this balance of understanding just how radically transformed these homes that are are going through demolition and redevelopment, how radically transformed they typically are. And I think we're trying to sort of accommodate all of those considerations in this recommendation. On the garage topic, again, it's one of the reasons why we're proposing a reduction of the operations and maintenance by including the garage. Certainly the construction impacts are there, but we do acknowledge that garages probably don't have the same kind of mechanical features in them that the rest of the house does. They're probably, they don't have the same kind of maintenance requirements that maybe other portions of the home does, but certainly at the moment of construction, they certainly do. So that's one, kind of the culmination of those issues are one of the reasons why staff is proposing not to use the full operations and maintenance calculation.
Yeah, I can see your point that a house has been lived in, even if it was mitigated, gets ripped down and new construction comes up. You're just throwing away that mitigation is what this does in essence, because you're building a new house. And I don't argue with the 100% construction. Yeah. Takes a while for my mind to get around.
Well, and I will say that I tread into this conversation really delicately because it's taken me several years to try to understand all this stuff in my head, and so explaining it in an audience, even with folks who think about this stuff pretty frequently, there's a lot of detail here.
John?
I just want to mention that a lot of the new construction I've seen, both here in Aspen and out in Snowmass Village, garages have changed.
That's true, too.
They are not the garages of old where you just pull your car in and park it. I don't need to go into detail. There's plumbing involved. There are beer coolers and wine coolers and things to store everything from kayaks to bikes to skis. They're a different animal than they were. That's my comment.
So you're saying, not to put words in your mouth, but
I
that,
believe
the
they
garage-
should count.
What?
I believe they should count as FAR.
I appreciate all of that. That is great input. This is great work. I had the same question about basements and stairs, I think was in the other equation. At this point in this presentation and what you've given me, I am supportive of staff's recommendation at this time. As Rachel said, I could be talked into higher, but I think that this is a great starting point, and it can be changed and modified as we learn about this program, including the garage and including the stairs or what have you. I'm listening to what you said. You have spent the last 7 months, 9 months in depth with this. It's great to see Jessica on the screen with us. Our other consultants that have been pulled in have put a lot of thought, time, and effort into this with a resolve towards the fairness, equity, and appropriateness. So I'm appreciative of your recommendation. At this time, I can support the direction that we're going.
Thank you. And one other point of clarification, I think, for members of council and for the public, just because I think there's been some confusion. The only circumstances under which you would lose your credit for existing floor area is in a demolition scenario. If you did a massive remodel of your home and added 1,000 square feet, but you didn't trigger demolition, all you would be responsible for are the new 1,000 square feet. So the loss of existing credit is only in circumstances where there's a full scrape and, where you're crossing that
Scrape and
40%
replace.
40% demolition threshold, yeah. So just because I think it's a regular conversation we have with members of the public, and I just wanted to sort of.
I think that's an important point.
Yeah.
That the
Well,
public should be aware of.
I think that's an important point, and I think it's good that we're looking at these ratios and the potential of increase based on the current fee-in-lieu, and not the new fee-in-lieu, which we'll be considering later at a separate ordinance, which will deal with the inflationary factors that we've seen in the construction market. So it's more than on current, but if there's a new fee-in-lieu scheduled next year and every year or every 2 years, that will be significant.
Ben, thank you for helping me understand that.
Well, I think you're above average if you got to where you got to, even without my assistance board. It's a complicated set of topics. Okay, so without any further discussion on 13, unless there are questions about 13, I want to move briefly to just a couple slides on the fee in lieu increase, and then we'll be done. Very quickly, I think most of you were present for the fee in lieu increase. We adopted that a year ago. It was as a result of a major study. We reshifted the way that we did calculation. We looked at actual affordable housing projects, both private sector and public sector, and arrived at a new fee in lieu schedule. The code, based on that process, requires an annual update and a full restudy every 5 years. This would be our first annual update following that study. And the study the annual update is based on this publication called the Engineering News Record and their National Construction Cost Index. They take 20 cities, they look at, a collection of labor and construction materials that are static across those 20 cities. They look at those same measures over time. That's what we use to propose this annual increase. But just to kind of go back to where we are currently, this is all based on land and construction costs that we calculated using 2019, 2020 numbers, where to build a square foot of affordable housing is $1,105 a square foot. That translates into about $442,000 under, per FTE. We then subtract the income that you could get from the sale of an APSHA unit or the rent from an APSHA unit, and that's where we land on the current fee in lieu. So we do that by category. I think council knows this, but category 2 is what we use as the number for mitigating for single family and duplex. Category 4 is what we use for commercial, lodge, multifamily. I know this has been a topic that Rachel has talked about as to why, and if we should still do that, but that's what we currently have in the code. We're not proposing change at this time on that topic. And then this is what we're proposing based on that Engineering News Record, National Construction Cost Index. Looking at these 20 cities from May of 2021 to May of 2022, it translates into nearly an 8.5% increase, roughly consistent with inflation nationally. Don't know if it responds to the sort of local inflationary costs of construction and land, but we feel like it's a good step forward and is certainly defensible. Just to give you a sense, though, of how kind of aberrant this number is based on years past, 2019 was a 1.5% increase. 2020 to 2021 was just a 2% increase. So this is a significant increase year to year. There's no doubt about it. To give you a sense, it's roughly about $30,000, $32,000 of increase per category. Changes a little bit, but it's a significant increase. And that is the sole topic of Ordinance 24. Happy to answer any questions about that. And then 14, yeah.
Well, I would just comment based, reading through the memo, this is based on a clear nexus and national standards and reality. If there's anything that is not based on is actual Aspen land cost, which we can look at. I can't really look at construction costs and supply chain issues, but we know what's happened to the price of raw land.
Yeah.
And for us to build housing, and without someone making a wonderful donation to the cause, we have to pay free market land costs. So this is very concurrent. And again, I look at the nexus. I look at, is this fully defensible? Is this reality? This is not trying to overcharge, it's trying to not undercharge. And to fulfill that goal. So I appreciate that, and I will support it.
Gordon and John?
Yeah, I think that for years that the mitigation, the fee-in-lieu has been way too low. And the move towards getting it closer to what the actual costs are, if we don't do this, we're losing ground. So I'm supportive of this.
Thanks, Gordon. John, comments?
Yeah, I definitely support it. I think the roughly $32,000 increase is in Aspen. That's very doable. The market will bear that.
Thanks.
Well, I was just wondering if you'd take a motion to approve the reading of Ordinance 13.
Wait, there, okay, looks good.
I'm happy to entertain any further conversation with council, answer any questions, or, and this is probably even more relevant, any information that you don't have that you feel like you need at second reading on any of these topics. Happy to either get staff or our consultants working on any of that information.
The only thing I could think of, which I don't want to make a mandatory by any way, shape, or form, but what we're doing, we've been very exposed to the context. I'm not so sure the context of the lack of workforce throughout the region, let alone the state. What has happened to housing prices in the Mid-Valley or in the free market. I've been trying to talk to people about the issue, and at least from my perspective, we've always depended on 65, 75% of the workforce to come from outside of Pickens County. And that housing is as unaffordable to most working families now as living in Aspen itself. And when we're looking at doing more affordable housing to save both our economy and our sense of community by having the people to fulfill the jobs and to have them have a decent life and not commuting 2 hours a day or more. And I'm not so sure we'll be able to get those commuters up here now that there's a lot of good jobs in the Mid-Valley and Lower Valley. So I think just some context that created the council's action would be helpful to the discussion.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's a good recommendation, and we're already contemplating that. I think one of the, powerful pieces of evidence, Design Workshop is working on these kinds of issues in a lot of different communities. Our other consultants are working on these kinds of issues in a lot of other communities. I think we can certainly provide some additional context.
Yeah, but what's happened to those who can't get into AH? Where are they left in the free market anymore? A short story, I live at Hunter Creek, the old Silver King, not really all that well built, and certainly not up to our 400 square foot per person rule, but one of the units in our building was still free market. I think the original deal was if they weren't all sold to employees in the first 90 days, the developer could take them free market. And so I talked to another neighbor, and she said, well, the little family in there is going to be moving out. And I said, really? And she's like, yeah, they were paying $5,000 a month for the 3-bedroom, but their lease is over, and now it's going to be $7,500, and they just can't afford it. So you think about $84,000 a year in rent to develop no equity whatsoever. That's the free market that remains in our town, and that also implies what it costs you to live in Basalt or Carbondale as well.
There's a house for rent up by the speed bump house, 4-bedroom, $15,000 a month.
Yeah, well, that's a whole house.
Still only 4 bedrooms.
I know, I'm teasing you. Anyhow, context matters.
Ben, just a question for you. You said you have an invite out to people for tomorrow to follow up on first reading, kind of, or?
It was to give a last-minute opportunity to folks who have been engaged in our process to this point. People who have shown up at focus group meetings, people who have shown up and had conversations with us at different events that we've put on. And we sent a targeted email out to about 70 folks that were in that category. A lot from the development and design community, but also members of the public who, own properties and wanted to have their interests represented as well. And so we've, from 4 to 5:30 tomorrow evening in Pearl Pass, Garrett and I will be there, just kind of an open house for people to come and make comment. We'll be aggregating those comments and giving them to council at second reading.
Thank you. Small suggestion, maybe if there's budget available, we have more of a get-together to thank those people that have been participating.
After the fact, yeah.
And I don't know, we can wait till second reading or what have you, but I would support that. I think that saying thank you to them in a nice way would be great.
There's been some folks for sure who have put a fair amount of time and thought and goodwill into participating with us.
Nice. Very good. Good thought, Tori.
So with that, I would take a motion, or I've already had it, for a reading of both Ordinance 13 and 14.
Did we? No, I thought Ward started and then we stopped.
I moved for reading of 13.
I'll second.
One at a time? Yes. All right. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussions? Seeing none, could we have a roll call vote for reading of Ordinance number 13?
Counselor Doyle?
Yes.
Counselor Howenstein?
Yes.
Counselor Richards?
Yes.
Mayor Tory?
Yes.
Ordinance number 13, series of 2022, an ordinance of the Aspen City Council amending City of Aspen Land Use Code Sections 26.104.100, definitions 26.210 Community Development Department, 26.212 Planning and Zoning Commission, 26.312 Nonconformities, 26.316 Appeals, 26.430 Special Review, 26.470 Growth Management Quota System, 26.540 Certificates of Affordable Housing Credit, 26.575.020 Calculations and Measurements, and 26.710 Zone Districts, and the creation of a new Section 26.580 Demolition. Additionally, this ordinance adopts the residential demolition and redevelopment standards as identified in Section 26.580 Demolition.
Motion.
I move that we adopt Ordinance 13, Series 2022.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, could we have a roll call vote for Ordinance number 13 on first reading, please?
Counselor Doyle?
Yes.
Counselor Howenstein?
Yes.
Counselor Richards?
Yes.
Mayor Tory?
Yes.
I would make a motion for the first reading of ordinance number 14, series of 2022.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Do we have a roll call vote for reading of ordinance number 14?
Counselor Doyle?
Yes.
Counselor Howenstein?
Yes.
Counselor Richards?
Yes.
Mayor Tory?
Yes.
Ordinance number 14, series of 2022, an ordinance of the Aspen City Council amending City of Aspen Land Use Code Section 26.470.050, calculations to adopt a revised affordable housing mitigation fee-in-lieu rate schedule.
All right.
I move we adopt Ordinance 14, Series 2022.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. No further discussion. Could we have a roll call vote for ordinance number 14 on
Flip a coin next
first
time.
reading?
Counselor Doyle?
Yes.
Counselor Howenstein?
Yes.
Counselor Richards?
Yes.
Mayor Tory?
Yes. Ben, to you and your team, Jessica, Philip, if you're still with us or listening, great work.
And every department that's helped us out.
Yeah.
Exhausting and long-term, thank you.
Thank you.
I think this will
And there are some few desserts
our
left.
community.
Yes, take some cupcakes.
Take them all.
Thank you, Jessica.
All right, we have one more item that'll bring us down to our action item. This is a letter of support for the Greater Roaring Fork Valley Housing Coalition to apply for a Colorado Department of Local Affairs Housing Planning Grant. Diane, I have a feeling you might present this.
Yes, and if you would prefer, I can speak really quickly.
I do prefer.
Okay, and is it okay if I sit here?
It's okay.
Great.
Yes.
Quick update, Roaring Fork Valley Housing Coalition had its first board meeting on Friday. 7 members from local government or housing authorities, plus CMC, Dave Myler. Great depth of affordable housing on that team. Initial focus, rental assistance programs, buy down, both ownership and rental, ADU incentives, development neutral is the initial focus. And tonight, I am looking for support for 2 things. One is your support for applying for a DOLA grant called IHOP. I can't believe Carolyn's leaving. Your support for applying for a DOLA grant called IHOP. None of us can figure out what IHOP stands for, other than the obvious.
International House of Pancakes.
Clearly, I think they just wanted to make us do that. And the second is to authorize city manager or her designee to sign off on future letters of support, so I don't have to write so many reports. The specific grant, it's the amount of the grant request is going to be $100,000. There'll be a $25,000 match, which the Housing Coalition will provide. The due date's June 27th, which is why I'm here today. And the purpose of that grant will be assessment of affordable housing strategies and policies across the 8 members, and also looking at barriers, but basically putting together a toolkit for folks to use. Thank you.
Excellent.
You know, I'm supportive of this effort and everything. I just want to make sure we're not reinventing the wheel. You know, CML is going to have a toolkit presented, I think, at this conference. There's other, Northwest Council of Governments has kind of put together a toolkit. And so I'm hoping it gets a lot more specific to our valley, to our region, for $100,000, $125,000 expenditure. That's all I really want to comment.
It is, and that's exactly, Rachel, the purpose is that deep dive locally. And I have been nothing short of floored with the level of expertise of this board and the group that's been working on this for some time. I spent 14 months at APSHA, and I'm like, no 10% of what they know.
Yeah.
So while it, Aspen won't necessarily be one of the first towns where someone does a grant or applies for matching funds, I do think we're going to get ideas out of there, no question.
Sure. No, as I say, I'm very supportive. I just would like to make sure it's not regurgitation of some of the other toolkits that I've been seeing out there.
Thank you.
Thank you. So do we need a motion to approve that or something?
This is not the resolution that's in the packet. It's not the resolution.
I know, I was reading, isn't it about the cardio or something?
I double-checked it yesterday, I thought.
It doesn't have the approval of granting the city manager the authority to approve further grants. Was the
Further letters.
The pull and pump and cardio thing resolution wrong?
That was consent calendar, wasn't it?
No, but it's just,
So
I'm
the
sorry.
resolution's in here. This is mine, not Jim's.
Yeah, this is not the one that,
This is, right. So I think, Jim, couldn't council grant the authority anyway, or delegate the authority?
what they could do is move to approve the resolution in the packet that includes the language and does further authorize the city manager as city manager's designee to execute additional grant requests of GR FV as she determines are acceptable.
I move to approve with the language the city attorney has suggested included.
I'll second.
Okay, and that resolution number, which is also not in, is.
At 15?
Should be noted. Resolution,
15?
is it? I don't know.
I don't know if we've done another one in between the ones we're.
Oh, that was it.
It's resolution number 77.
77.
77.
15 was the ordinance.
Those terms.
Okay.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. Can we have a roll call vote for ordinance 70, resolution 77?
Counselor Doyle,
Yes.
Counselor Howenstein,
Yes.
Counselor Richards,
Yes.
Mayor Tory.
Yes.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
John, get in there. There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Can we have a roll call vote for adjournment, please?
Counselor Doyle,
Yes.
Counselor Howenstein,
Yes.
Counselor Richards,
Yes.
Mayor Tory.
Yes.
Thank you.
Now that we're adjourned, go Avs.
Thank you, GrassRoots.
I greatly appreciate your statement, Ward. That's pretty powerful.
Kind of drained me.
No, they do. I mean, but you feel compelled